Hi, everybody. I can see a bunch of folks joining now. We are going to get started in about a minute, but in the meantime, we would love for you to write in the chat who you are, introduce yourself, and where you are zooming in from. Okay, I'm seeing people trickling in. Make sure that you write in, introduce yourself in the chat, and where you're zooming in from. We love to know who's with us. All right. So while folks are still trickling in, and I'm loving this chat, we will get started. So, hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. This is Making Strides 2024, a look at our state report cards. My name is Natasha Riveron, and I'm the Policy and Implementation Manager at Safe Routes Partnership. I'll be your webinar moderator today, as well as one of the presenters. We're really excited to have all of you here today as we share our updated state report cards on support for walking, biking, active kids, and communities. Today's webinar will focus on the overview and methodology we used for these report cards. And so we're not going to be answering state-specific questions today, but we are always happy to do follow-up calls and walk through the information and scoring for specific states. So we're going to be sharing our emails at the end, so please feel free to email us. All right, so we are Safe Routes Partnership. Our mission is to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. We just want to make sure that we invite you to join us next month for the 8th Safe Routes to School National Conference. The Safe Routes to School National Conference provides an opportunity for individuals and organizations interested and involved with safe routes to school, active transportation, and healthy communities to network, engage in educational opportunities, and form partnerships to enhance their work. So this year, the conference will be in Fort Collins, Colorado from October 22nd to 24th and includes keynote speeches. We're going to have breakout sessions, mobile workshops, networking, and it's going to be a really great opportunity to network and share best practices and explore Fort Collins. It's a really great place. And for those of you who are joining us from state departments of transportation, we want to remind you that the Federal Highway Administration has invited you to a joint meeting of safe routes to school coordinators and transportation alternatives managers. So this meeting will be held Tuesday, October 22nd from 9 to noon Mountain Time. And that's going to be before the conference in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the session will be a really great opportunity to connect with peers, hear from FHWA, and build communal knowledge to advance these programs. We encourage you to join us there and to join the full conference after attending that meeting. Just as some housekeeping, the audience will be muted during the presentations, and you can join today through your phone or computer audio. The chat's open. Feel free to submit questions and comments. We'll collect them at the end. However, we will not be using today's webinar to answer specific questions about scoring for specific states. Again, our team is really happy to follow up later. I'm joined today by Marisa Jones, Managing Director, Policy and Partnerships Director as well as Corey Johnson, our Program and Engagement Manager. We all co-authored this report, and we're going to start by giving an overview of the report and then give in-depth dives into the 4 topic areas and the indicators that we use to measure state strengths in each area. We will provide a summary of our findings and reflections after each core topic area. So Maurice, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Natasha, and thank you all so much for joining us here. We are so excited for the 2024 state report cards to be out in the world, for you to learn about how to use them and really use them as a roadmap to improve conditions for people walking, bicycling, and for safe routes to school. So let's talk about why we have state report cards and how this project came to be. So our overall goal with the state report cards is to provide a snapshot of how supportive each state is of walking, bicycling, and physical activity for children and adults. Our first state report cards were prepared in 2016. The 2018 report cards were an update to the 2016 report in that they continue the assessment of the same core topic areas, and they provided updated information on a number of the same indicators. We also expanded what is assessed within the topic areas and added indicators in areas that we think are key to understanding the breadth of state-level policy and supports that can be provided. The 2024 reports are an update. Each year, this is an iterative process. We do our best to maintain continuity, but as federal law changes and as new research comes out that tells us about the efficacy of the indicators that we're scoring on, we make updates to the reports. So in 2024, several indicators were revised because of updates to the evidence and because of changes to federal legislation that required us to make changes to the scoring. So for this current year's report, we encourage states to look at their 2024 data to identify core topic areas in which they excel and areas that may need some improvement. And because there are a lot of changes because of federal law, we encourage you not necessarily to compare your score over time. And there's a lot more detail about this in the report itself. The report cards acknowledge the strength of each state, and they let champions and state governments understand how their state is doing in comparison to the great potential that comes through policy and other state-level supports for healthy, active living opportunities. One of the things that we love about the state report cards is that they provide a roadmap for states interested in supporting walking, bicycling, and physical activity for children and adults. And really importantly, they help states get ideas from their peer states. We recognize that so often those of you who are working on these issues, especially within state agencies, you want to know what your counterparts are doing and get some ideas and inspiration from them, and the report cards help shine a light on that. We would really like to take a moment to thank the many people who have contributed to the development of these report cards and this publication. We could not have developed the report cards without significant assistance from state government staff from a variety of agencies. And we also thank the range of experts and partners who helped us refine our understanding of the topic areas and measures over the past 5 editions of the state report cards. I know Katie Adamson from the YMCA of the USA is on here, and we would really like to extend our tremendous gratitude to the YMCA of the USA, who is our partner in this work. The partnership between our organizations to create and disseminate these report cards has been instrumental in supporting states to create conditions that enable physical activity for kids and communities. And this publication was made possible through Cooperative Agreement OT 1802 from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Its contents are solely the responsibility of Safe Routes Partnership and do not necessarily represent the official views of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So with that, let's dive into the key contents. What's in the state report cards? We understand, we know this is the 5th time we're doing this. We understand that for many of you, you zoom forward to just look at your state's one-page snapshot. But I want to make sure that you're oriented to the breadth of information that is contained in the report itself. So we start with research, really focused on why physical activity matters and why walking and bicycling are excellent forms of everyday physical activity. We provide a greater depth of information on the rationale for state report cards. And then we go into so much detail explaining the scoring, the indicators, and the core topic areas. And then we have the report cards themselves. So each state has a one-page PDF that you can access in the report or from our website. You can click on the icon of your state to be taken there. And that's where you can see how your state scores on each indicator. Then at the end of the report, we have reflection. So we extrapolate what we have learned from looking at trends all across the country. And when possible, when there weren't changes to the scoring, we make comparison to prior years to really see like how are states doing, where is their momentum, where is their not momentum, and really trying to understand why that might be. We also have maps that illustrate some of the key findings. We really want to make sure that we are appealing to and presenting the information in ways that appeals to different types of learners. And then at the end, we have appendices that have the scoring and grading by state, as well as additional scoring breakdowns. So let's talk about what changed from 2022. I mentioned in the opening, we actually did see a lot of change. We aim to maintain consistency in indicators to provide predictability to states. But the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021 created both new federal requirements and opportunities for states to support walking, bicycling, safe routes to school, and active transportation. And so the 2024 state report cards account for these changes in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we did put out a preview of this. We want to be really sensitive to not just scoring states retroactively. So we put out a preview last year on how the scoring was going to change. So although we made some changes to scoring, some of the indicators, we retained the same basic structure and grading scale. And when you look at the report, you will see the indicators that have changed. They're noted as revised in the report. For the 2024 report card, we also removed an indicator. We removed the indicator related to state requirements for physical education. And the justification for that is that it's related to activities that occur almost exclusively on school campuses and within the school day. And it is less aligned with the strategies that comprise the remainder of the report cards, which focus on creating conditions to support walking, bicycling, and active kids in communities. So the points that were previously assigned to that indicator have been redistributed to give additional weight to indicators in the federal and state active transportation funding and state safe routes to school funding and supportive practices core topic areas. So I know I mentioned this before, but I'll just reiterate it. As a result of the changes, the individual state grades and scores are not directly comparable. But this can still really shine a light on areas where your state excels and where there are opportunities for improvement. So we'll just remind everyone where to find this on our website, and we will drop a link in the chat to it as well. But if you go to our website, saferoutespartnership.org, if you scroll down to the features section, there is the big banner that says Making Strides, 10 years. If you click on that, it will take you to the map that shows the overall scores for each state. So you can click on your state's icon to get your individual state report card. And then you can click on the link below that to go to the full report. And also on this page, we have 2 fact sheets that I know the reports are very lengthy, so we want to make sure that you have quick access to information about understanding the scoring and then also ideas on how to use your state report card. And at the end of the webinar today, Natasha will also direct you to some other resources that can help orient you to what specifically to do based on how your state scores in the state report cards. So let's talk a little bit about the scoring. Each report card includes a score for 26 separate indicators, and they're grouped into 4 core topic areas and then subtopics within those core topic areas. And these indicators look at state policy and implementation of policies or funding, as well as practices that a state undertakes. Most indicators are scored from 0 to 5, 10, or 15 points, but there are a few indicators where a state could receive a negative point for a very detrimental action. There are 200 points total possible across all the indicators. And if you don't know our organization, maybe this is news to you, but if you do know us, hopefully this aligns with how you have experienced working with us in the past. But we approach all of our work from an asset orientation. And so we wanted to use that asset-based scoring. So we don't give states an A to F score like a school report card. Instead, we choose scoring categories that focus on the progress and opportunities in the state. So we think about this like what you would do if you're getting ready to go out for a walk or jog. The first level is lacing up in yellow, warming up, it comes next in Kelly green. Making strides is like you're really getting going. You've got some great momentum. That's the forest green. And then in navy, we have building speed to really recognize the states that are doing an excellent job in certain core topic areas. So we'll walk through the state report cards and we'll use New Jersey as our example this year. And New Jersey was one of the states to get an overall score of making strides. So at the top, the state is listed along with the icon and the color of their overall score. And then you can see how many points were achieved out of 200. So you can see that New Jersey has 148 points out of the possible 200. So looking down the left, you'll see the core topic areas, which are in capital letters, and then subtopics. And in some cases, there's a short description for each indicator. And then over on the right, for the core topic area, you can see that there's a scoring icon and the number of points earned. And the icon is placed on a scale, so you can see at a glance how the score fell against the possible total. Then for each indicator is the number of points achieved out of the total possible points, with the total points earned for the core topic area at the bottom. So one thing that is new this year is that we have bonus points for 2 indicators. And these bonus points are available when we're aiming to reward innovation and being out in the cutting edge, as well as when we see states sort of doubling down on effective practices. So on the state report card, you can see either an asterisk or a little plus sign, and then there will be a footnote if your state got bonus points. And all the explanation of this is available in greater detail in the report itself. But the indicators that have bonus points available are, the first one is within the federal and state active transportation funding core topic area for states that use Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP funds, as the match to TAP projects. And then within Safe Routes to School supported practices, there are bonus points available for states that have more than one Safe Routes to School coordinator. Okay, so on to data from 2024. So this map shows the overall grades for each state. In 2024, there were 6 states in the lacing up category in yellow, and 4 in the navy building speed. And so what this tells us is that most states are in the middle. They've taken some significant action to support physical activity, but there's also room for improvement in core areas. Every region in the country has at least one state that puts them in the dark green making strides category over 101 points. And we think that's really important because, again, we know that sometimes you want to look at states that are close to you, our neighboring states, or maybe feel more relatable. And so being able to see that there is this distribution in state practices across the country suggests that this is possible all over the country. And with that, I will turn it over to Natasha to talk about core topic area number 1.
All right, so core topic area number 1. We're going to go through each of the topic areas and describe the indicators that we looked at in a little more depth. This first one is complete streets and active transportation policy and planning. So when we look at the complete streets and active transportation policy and planning area, states in the West and Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions are above the national average, which was 19 points. And while the Midwest region state scores significantly below average, there were 40 points allotted for this topic area, and we think this shows some promise as an area for states to continue to improve their scores in the future. So we will cover each of these areas by looking at a specific state and kind of using them as an example. For this section, we'll look closer at Florida, which has a total score of 23 out of 40 possible points for this area. This put them in the second best category, which is making strides. So shown here in the overview, there are two subtopics: complete streets policies and active transportation policy planning and design. And looking at a few reasons why we include these important measures. So active transportation is a really key strategy for children and adults to get the recommended amount of daily physical activity. And the way that our streets are designed can support or hinder active transportation and physical activity. People with access to more and better quality sidewalks are more likely to walk and meet physical activity recommendations. And then similarly, people with access to bicycle lanes and paths are more likely to bicycle and meet physical activity recommendations. So looking at the subtopic on complete streets policies, if you're not familiar with complete streets policies, these are documents that ensure that all new construction and renovation of streets create streets that are safe and comfortable and convenient for everyone using them. And by everyone, we mean people walking and biking, cars, public transportation riders, people with disabilities, and people of all ages. And then how do we sort of evaluate these for our report cards? First, we look at if a state has adopted a complete streets policy. We consider the type of policy in place and then recognize legislation as the strongest policy type. So then that's followed by Department of Transportation policies. And our reasoning here is that passing complete streets legislation is more permanent and binding. And in contrast, complete streets Department of Transportation policies are likely to get into specific details on course of action, but may be more easily rescinded or altered with a change in department leadership. So then second, we look at the strength of these complete streets policies using the National Complete Streets Coalition's updated scoring system for measuring the strength of these policies. So their system includes 10 elements used to measure complete streets policies using a scoring rubric with a maximum of 100 points. So we convert their score to our point system that has 20 points max. So as you'll see, Florida has both a DOT policy and legislation, so it received full points for the first indicator. Florida's policy strength scored 8 out of 20 points, which means there's room for improvement. Next, we look at indicators related to goals and planning for active transportation. We look at whether a state has published goals to increase bicycling and walking, and then this year we gave full points for numerical goals or commitments. These goals are public commitments to progress and provide accountability, and they can often be found in highway safety plans, bike ped plans, sustainability plans, or other statewide plans. And looking at whether the state has adopted a state pedestrian, bicycle, or active transportation plan in the last 10 years, these plans are ways that states create a planning foundation that allows state agencies and regional and local partners to coordinate on supporting projects, policies, and programs. So Florida got 10 points because they have adopted both bicycle and pedestrian master plans within the last 10 years. And I think that's the key point. So then let's wrap up this core topic area. We're going to look at overall outcomes and trends since the 2022 report. So 37 states have complete streets policies of some sort. Kentucky, Washington, and Wisconsin revised their policies since the 2022 report. And so then 8 states have legislation and or DOT policies. 10 have state legislation only. And then DOT only, there's 18 states. So then walking and biking goals. So 16 states included goals for increasing both walking and biking, 5 of which included specific percentages or numerical increases. 26 states have a bicycle or pedestrian plan updated within the last 10 years. A majority include both plans within the same plan. And then we did hear that multiple states are in the process of updating their plans right now, so we expect this number to go up in the next iteration of this report. Okay, Marisa.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Natasha. So now let's talk about funding. Let's talk about funding that supports active transportation. This is core topic area 2, federal and state active transportation funding. Let's start by looking at the map of overall scores for this core topic area. And the great news is that we see a distribution of states in the highest scoring category. Again, reminder, that's the navy blue, building speed, and we see those again in regions all across the country. And we also see many states in the second highest category, which is the dark green category, and lots in the Kelly green, warming up. It is really inspiring to see that there are states building speed in all regions of the country. So once again, all regions have peer states to look at for examples on how to improve their score. So we are going to look at Arizona's state report card for this overview. And Arizona landed in, for this core topic area, the dark green category 3, making strides. And you can see here, they received a total score of 55 out of 80 possible points. On the left, you will notice that there are 2 subtopics in this core topic area, and we'll go over each in a little bit more detail in the following slide. So just again, one more reminder that when you look at your own state report card, to please reference the full report for the specifics on points for each indicator. Okay, so in the first section, we assess states on how they're implementing the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program. So this is an area where we saw a lot of change because of changes to federal law. So the indicators themselves are the same, but the way that we scored the data is a little bit differently. So I want to note that some of the indicators, we look at a state's historical performance since the Transportation Alternatives Program existed in its current iteration in 2012, and some of them got a fresh start since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. But just backing up a tiny bit, hopefully you are aware of transportation alternatives. But if you're not, we use the abbreviation TAP, and it was created by Congress in 2012 when Congress merged together 3 separate programs that support safe routes to school, bicycling, and walking. It's the leading source of federal formula dollars for walking, bicycling, and safe routes to school, and it totals about $1.3 billion annually. Each state gets an apportionment, gets an allotment of those funds, anywhere from $4 million to about $128 million a year from TAP. And that increased 60% with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that's a big change from our 2022 state report cards. And the federal government makes the funding available to states, but then it's up to states to get the funding out the door through a competitive process. So the 3 indicators in the yellow box highlighted on this slide assess 3 critical steps in turning TAP funding into local sidewalks, crosswalks, trails, bike lanes. So the first one is transfers. So this one changed. So let's chat about this. Before the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, states were allowed to transfer up to half of their TAP money to other types of projects, roads, bridges, rather than keeping it all for biking and walking. We have always discouraged states from doing this as it diverts money away from active transportation. So they were docked points based on the amount of funds transferred. But the bipartisan infrastructure law made changes to this provision. And now states are required to first give local communities an opportunity to compete for those funds. And there are a couple of other things that go along with this. before they transfer out of the program. And so this is one where typically, until this year, the state report cards looked at cumulative data since 2012, but we didn't want to penalize states for transfers that were totally permitted before the law changed. So we gave every state a blank slate this year, and we are only docking points if they have transferred funds since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I just want to flag that scores are really high on this indicator, and we expect that over time, if states choose to transfer funds after complying with the provisions in the law, the scores will go down on this indicator. The second indicator in the yellow box is that states must hold a competition to award projects. They have to let local governments, schools, and nonprofits seek funding for active transportation projects. And points for this indicator are awarded based on if a state held competitions for and awarded TAP projects since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law rather than over the history of the program. So this is another one where we shifted from cumulative to since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And there were two reasons for this. So one of them is that the bipartisan infrastructure law gave states way more money to compete out. So we really wanted to assess whether states were able to manage this influx of new funds, which they are, so we scored them based on whether or not they have held at least one competition since the passage of the law. And then the second thing was the data availability question. We didn't have the annual reports yet from the Federal Highway Administration, but I already saw in the chat that the Federal Highway Administration has shared the annual reports. So you can see the projects that were awarded and applied for since 2022 and 2023, but we did not have that available at the time of our data collection and report writing. So you can see here, again, Arizona got 10 out of 10 points because they have held a competition since the passage of the BIL. And then the third indicator that we score in the box, so this is one that we retained tracking over the history because we're looking at obligation. And so this is the third stage in the process. States have to obligate funds, which means helping a project get through the contracting and regulatory process so it can actually be built. And the obligation data are really most informative when we have 4 years of data. We want to make sure that states are obligating at least 60% of their funds. They're staying ahead of what's called lapsing, letting the money expire. And so that's what we needed to make sure that we looked over the lifetime of the program. So Arizona got a 4 out of 10 here because they have obligated at least half of their TAP funds. Okay, so now moving to the 3 indicators in the next yellow box, we look at how states are ensuring that funding gets where it's most needed. So there are 3 key aspects here that we examined. The first is states can make it easier to get funds where they're most needed by adding equity or high need considerations to how projects get awarded and funds are distributed. So they might give extra points to applicants in low-income communities or set funding aside for these types of applications. And this is one that experienced a change from federal law as well. The bipartisan infrastructure law requires states to define and prioritize high-need communities in TAP awards, and it's up to the state to come up with that definition for itself and determine what it means to prioritize. And we were really examining whether a state clearly communicates that to prospective applicants. And the hope is that that clarity will inspire communities that might just see all the challenges that they have and think that they're not competitive to see themselves as a potentially successful applicant. And because it is now required by federal law, this is another area that's new this year. States can actually receive negative points if they don't comply because it's required by federal law. So Arizona receives a 6 out of 6 full points on this. The second indicator in this yellow box, another barrier often faced by applicants for TAP is that TAP typically only covers 80% of the project cost. And we know that areas with low property tax bases, low population density, low income, rural communities often have a hard time finding funding as the match, which then prevents them from applying. So with this one, we're looking at whether the state does anything creative to provide or lower the match for high need communities. And Arizona receives 0 points because they don't provide matching funds for communities on tap. And then the third thing in this box is we assess what kind of support states are providing to applicants. Are they providing workshops? Are they providing grant writing experience? And we know, again, this is particularly important for small towns, rural communities, low-income communities that might not have planning and transportation functions within their local governments, or they don't have funding to hire a grant writer. And this is another one where new provision in law. So the bipartisan infrastructure law created a new flexibility for states to use up to 5% of their TAP funds to provide potential applicants and awarded recipients technical assistance to get high quality applications in the door and expedite project delivery. So this scoring threshold increased, recognizing that states now have a funding source to support that work. So we are super pleased to see states making progress, prioritizing TAP resources for communities most in need. And we really saw that in 2022, 24 states prioritized high need communities within TAP. And then in 2024, that leapt ahead to 38 states. So pleased to see that. And then the next indicator, yeah, thanks, Natasha. So with this indicator, we're looking at whether or not a state sets aside other federal non-TAP funds for active transportation. And we know that biking, walking, safe routes to school are broadly eligible for funding besides transportation alternatives, even though transportation alternatives is the predominant source of funding. So in this case, we are giving states points if they are putting other funds, dedicating perhaps surface transportation block grant funds or highway safety improvement program funds. And so we are giving them points if they dedicate other federal non-TAP funds to walking, bicycling, safe routes to school, and active transportation. Now I'll pass it back to Natasha to talk about state funding.
All right, so state funding. The second section of this is all about state level funding available for active transportation. And when we talk about state funding, we're specifically interested in non-federal money. This is like states are specifically putting their money toward this. So we look at 3 things here. Is there state money? How much? And whether the state provides special consideration for high need communities when spending that state money. So identifying sources of state funding is sort of an imperfect science because each state does this completely differently. And generally they're braiding together a variety of funding sources to pay for walking and biking. And so for the purpose of these report cards, we include any dedicated active transportation funding past or in place within the past 2 calendar years. So we're talking beginning with January of 2022. Additionally, we include funding when a state could clearly summarize its state funding awarded to active transportation projects per year. And we also look at whether states prioritize high need communities and how they do so when distributing or allocating that funding. So we're going to use, again, Arizona for this example. This section has 20 points available. So ongoing, or if there's any funding at all. So the first indicator, it's a binary. So does the state have funding or not? But also, is it one-time funding or ongoing funding? States that get points for having any funding at all, but may not get the highest amount if it's not ongoing. You get the highest number of points for dedicated funding on an ongoing basis, as long as it's at least it's over, 10 cents per capita. Arizona is doing really well here. They earned all 5 points because they have dedicated funding on an ongoing basis, which signals that they have this continued commitment to supporting walking and biking. The second indicator awards points based on the amount of funding spent on walking, biking per capita. So finding the best method of comparing funding amounts between states can be kind of challenging because of a number of differences. So states are pretty different in terms of population, density, economic strength, infrastructure, development patterns, topography, and maintenance. And so, in order to provide something meaningful and manageable to compare them, we use the amount of annual active transportation funding per capita. And to be transparent, our analysis has shown that to some extent, calculating per capita does make it easier for smaller states to earn more points in this section. And with that, still, we think it is the most meaningful and manageable comparison. Adding together the total amount Arizona dedicates to walking, biking, and safe routes to school, we basically divided that by the state's total population, and that adds up to $3.38 per person. This earned them 10 points out of 10. And for scale, 10 points is the cutoff for that is $3 per person. And if that doesn't really mean much for you, as a point of comparison, the average per person spending on highways is $558. The third indicator here is exploring whether states prioritize high-need communities. And Arizona got 5 points here for considering high-need communities because they have a specific funding program that is targeted toward communities that are outside of urbanized areas with a population of more than 1 million people. So they are prioritizing that, and I will hand it to Marisa for her reflections.
Awesome. So overall reflections on this core topic area, more than 80% of states are obligating at least 60% of their funding on tap, and that's the rate we look at to make sure they avoid lapses. States that has steadily increased over time, even with increased funding. We also saw that during the years covered by the 2024 state report cards, only 5 states transferred funding out of TAP, compared to 45 states that had transferred out of the program in prior years, which is suggesting that the new requirements in the bipartisan infrastructure law are an effective strategy for state to use funding on its intended project type. We're also so happy to see that states providing matching funds grew from 13 states to 17 states, and there were some new provisions in the law that support states supporting the match.
And then for state funding, we're really excited to say that we surpassed 1 billion in dedicated state money this year. This was the first time that we've passed that milestone. 33 states are dedicating state funding to walking and biking, and the 2-year average for annual state spending on active transportation rose, as well as the per capita spending. And then 14 states are prioritizing high need communities in their state funding allocations.
So now we'll shift over to core topic area number 3, safe routes to school, funding and supportive practices. I think most of you know this, but in case you don't, Safe Routes to School is an initiative to make it safer for more kids to walk, bike, and roll to and from school. We're going to look at 2 core topic areas, those related to funding, which I'll present on, those related to supportive practices, which Corey will present on. So we see that there are states doing a shining, wonderful example, again, in regions all across the country, and there's a lot of opportunity for growth here. And I know Kansas is on the call. I don't see Kristen from Connecticut, but I do want to give a shout out to 2 states that made massive leaps in this core topic area, Kansas and Connecticut. They get the most improved award, really following the roadmap of what's in this core topic area to build strong, effective safe routes to school programs. But when we look at the indicators here, we're going to look at Colorado because we're so excited to be hosting the 2024 National Safe Routes to School Conference there next month. So Colorado landed in the top category, building speed, with a total of 42 out of 50 possible points. Colorado is an exemplary state when it comes to state policies and practices to support and promote safe routes to school. So the scores for safe routes to school funding and supportive practices included 2 indicators that each received 1 additional point, increasing the maximum points allotted to these indicators. So let's go ahead and look at what those are. So the first one is related to funding, and within funding, we look at 4 different factors to understand whether state safe routes to school programs have the resources needed to operate effective and consistent programs. So the first one is understanding whether a state provides special consideration to safe routes to school when awarding TAP funding. Perhaps they set aside some of their TAP funding specifically for safe routes to school, or they award extra points. Colorado gets a 5 out of 7 because they use TAP funds to hold a separate competition. And this conveys that the state prioritizes safe routes to school and wants it to remain an effective program in their state. With the second indicator, we look at whether a state has created a revenue source for safe routes to school or uses other non-TAP federal dollars like federal safety money, the HSIP program for safe routes to school. And Colorado gets full points here because they allocate funding from the Surface Transportation Block Grant to safe routes to school. In the third indicator, we examine whether states fund safe routes to school non-infrastructure programming, education, encouragement. And this is because research shows us that safe routes to school is more effective when programming is paired with engineering and infrastructure improvements. And this is completely eligible under federal law, and yet not all states allow non-infrastructure. So Colorado gets a 7 out of 7 here because they have a standalone safe routes to school competition where non-infrastructure is eligible, and they require each of their infrastructure projects, engineering projects, to have an educational component. And then finally, we look at whether a state provides planning grants or mini grants, which can help get new or lower income schools started with safe routes to school. Colorado doesn't do this, so they did not get points for this indicator. And now I'm going to pass it over to Corey.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the second subtopic, which examines the types of support a state provides to safe routes to school programs. So this can include technical assistance that really helps ensure that safe routes to school initiatives are based upon best practices and tailored to local needs. It can also help schools that aren't currently funded to implement safe routes to school programs. So we'll look at 4 aspects here, and we're going to stay on the Colorado waves for a little bit. And first talk about the looking at the level of staffing a state dedicates to safe routes to school, whether it's coordinators or consultants. So Colorado scored a 6 out of 6 because they have more than one full-time safe routes to school staff, and they have consultants in addition to support support from state staff. We recommend that a state operates a resource center or provides technical assistance to communities that aren't funded to help them implement safe routes to school programs. And this indicator, we also look at whether a state has created any curricula or lesson plans to help integrate safe routes to school into the classroom. So in Colorado's case, they get a 7 out of 7 because they have an online safe routes to school resource center with training materials available. We also look at whether a state has adopted a safe routes to school plan or incorporated a safe routes to school into a state action plan. And again, Colorado gets full points here. They have a safe routes to school plan. And the final indicator in this section looks at whether states provide technical assistance and support that helps local communities engage specific demographic groups. That could be low-income students, students of color, as a part of their safe routes to school program. And so Colorado also gets a 5 out of 5 for this one too. Just a few reflections, and I'll move through these a bit quickly so you have plenty of time for Q&A. Basically, states in the West scored significantly above the national average with 35 points compared to the national average being 21.2, although at least one state in every region scores close to perfection in this area. So lots of good development in the West and a lot of room to grow in other parts of the country. In 2024, we saw 21 states either utilize state dollars or pull in non-TAP federal funding, such as the Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP, for Safe Routes to School funding. We also saw that collectively 21 states dedicated an average of $89.7 million to Safe Routes to School from state to non-TAP federal sources. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we again have plenty of time for Q&A. So just our final core topic area is taking a look at active schools and neighborhoods. So this is really turning from transportation to the policy and funding supports for kids and families to be active in their neighborhoods, have access to spaces for physical activity, and to be more active at their school. So from 2022 to 2024, we actually saw scores in this category or in this core topic area decrease, with 31 states falling in the lowest category, lacing up, 13 in warming up, 7 in making strides, and none in the highest category for building speed. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this downward shift is in part due to state policy and practice changes, mainly around providing incentives for shared use. But again, we just note that change, that the overall scoring in this topic area may also reflect changes to the indicators from 2022, based on the ones we're using in 2024. So we're going to take a look at Tennessee, which scored an 11 out of 30 in this core topic area, and that puts it in the warming up category. So the first subtopic takes a look at policies around shared use of facilities. So shared use is basically agreements that the school has to open up school playgrounds, fields, and facilities for recreational use by community members outside of school hours. It can provide additional places for physical activity and other community uses, and can especially be critical in neighborhoods that lack parks, playgrounds, or community centers. So the first indicator is adopted a state policy supporting shared use of school facilities. And state laws can make it more or less likely that a local school can agree to open its facilities for recreational or outside use, for recreational use outside of school hours. So to get 10 points, a state must have adopted legislation requiring schools to allow access to recreational facilities outside of school hours. So 0 points means there's no legislation, and here Tennessee got 6 points because it has legislation that recommends that schools do this, but does not require that schools provide access to their facilities. The second indicator looks at whether a state provides funding or other incentives to support shared use. So beyond having that policy, states can provide extra incentives through funding, encouraging local schools, cities, and groups to work together to implement shared use. And so here, Tennessee provides funding that requires a joint use agreement if the grant is used for school facilities like playgrounds or walking tracks. So here they were awarded 5 points. So that's a little bit about Tennessee for that indicator. We also took a look at school siting and design, which is a topic that we talk about a lot here at Safe Routes at the partnership. So the first indicator involves a negative policy that many states once had that requires these inordinately large school sites. So these requirements known as minimum acreage requirements, and these unnecessarily large school sites can drive up cost, but they also mean that some schools might not fit nestled into a neighborhood, but might be built on the outskirts of town or a more industrial area, which makes it harder for kids to be able to walk, bike, and roll to school. So states can only lose points for this category, up to 10 points. But since Tennessee does not have minimum acreage requirements, they don't lose any points, but just got a 0. And the second indicator looks at whether or not state siting guidelines include 4 factors that can support positive siting and design decisions by local school districts. Separate points are awarded for each factor that's addressed. And that can include criteria for encouraging consideration of walking and biking, co-location of school sites with parks or community considerations, and limiting the maximum size of a school site. And this indicator is worth up to 15 points. So again, just a few general reflections. The number of states with shared use policies hasn't really changed since 2020, and the number of states with incentives is pretty consistent.
So, well, I know we're a little bit tight on time because we needed to explain some of the changes, but the overall reflections are in the report as well. But we'll summarize that most states are in the middle. The average score was 95.5 out of 200. And in every region of the country, there's at least one state with a fairly high score. And I think really importantly, we want to share that every state has at least one area where it's doing a good job, where it's taking considerable steps. And every state has the opportunity to do more. So Natasha can tell you about some of the tools we have available to really use the roadmap and put it into action.
Yeah, so we have fact sheets that help understand the scoring system, and that's all on our website. We're also really excited to share resources that have direct steps and actions you can take with info on whether you're at a state, and this can be whether you're at a DOT or if you're a champion outside of the DOT. So I just wanted to point out here that there's this table. And so in each of the boosting your score fact sheets, there's these tables where we break down by indicator resources action steps, ideas. So like, don't feel overwhelmed by this. I would say like, look at one or two areas where your state could improve and consider sort of the climate and like what's doable, but make sure that you look at these resources and feel free to email us because we want to be helpful and get you on a track to sort of improving these scores. And again, this is where you can find it. They're at the resources, and then we will be posting this webinar so you can come back and see our explanations for things. And make sure you take the survey after this. Let's do questions. We're not going to answer state-specific questions, but if you have something about the overall webinar or the report cards in general or indicators, we're happy to answer that right now. Just as a reminder, we will be posting this recording. I know that that's always a question. Okay, I'm just looking in this chat box. Please feel free to add questions in this chat.
We have a question in the Q&A box. If it was
great.
possible to see any of the back end data to the reports, and kind of get a peek at the high need prioritization methodologies for a handful of states.
I'm happy to answer this one. So we developed, by we, I mean Natasha, and our team developed a fact sheet based on the 2022 data where we provide the back-end data specifically for that, for what you're asking. How are states defining and prioritizing high-need communities? So we have that as of 2022, and we're always working on creating fact sheets with the new data. I also want to share that our team has been doing a lot more work directly with state departments of transportation to better define and prioritize high need communities. So this is also something that we're always happy to hop on a call with you. I mean, I don't know what type of agency you're at, but we're always happy to hop on a call and talk about that. We think that sometimes it's more helpful to hear your situation and sort of guide to, okay, here's a state that might provide some ideas for you moving forward rather than just like looking at the raw data.
Yeah, and I see a note in the chat that the fact sheet link isn't working on our website, so we'll be sure to send out the working link in our follow-up email. So if you have trouble with that, hang tight and we'll make sure that we get the right link to you. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the Q&A box if you have them.
Here are the understanding and how to use. Here are the links on our website.
And I'm also going to drop the boosting your scores. We're going to put in a lot of links right now.
We have a question in the chat box asking if there's any kind of national coalition forming. Maggie, if you want to give a little bit more context, I don't know if you're looking for a national coalition around safe routes to school or the state report cards, yeah, you could add a little bit more for what you're looking for. I will use the opportunity to plug our Safe Routes to School listserv, which is a great chance for all of our Safe Routes practitioners to share ideas, best practices, you know, do a little bit of problem solving. So that's a great way to stay connected with other people across the country. As far as the National Safe Routes to School coalition forming, again, that's like I said, like we definitely have the listserv that's available. Our upcoming conference will be a great way to connect with other you know, practitioners. But yeah, as far as our work, we just kind of been, you know, providing this overview with the state report cards, and who knows what'll come from that opportunity. Reese, I don't know if you have more to add on.
Yeah, I just add, so our organization really started in more of in that vein of what you're talking about. And we would love to chat with you to hear what your interests are. We've got lots of ideas percolating about how to activate partners across the country to advance and grow the effective Safe Routes to School movement. I would say for this, the state report cards, we are really focused on what's happening at the state level. And I saw some great questions from folks in Missouri, and we'd love to follow up with you separately. And I think I've got an email in my inbox from you too. For the state report cards, we really view this as an opportunity for state level action. And as we shouted out Kansas and Connecticut, like there are these great examples of states that have used their state report cards. Our partners at the YMCA of the USA have been excellent partners. Illinois is another example that really, the State Alliance of YMCAs in Illinois was one of the groups really leading that charge, North Carolina as well. So I think a great step is identifying who could you join in partnership with in your state to move the needle. But we certainly also always welcome interest in supporting federal level safe routes to school policy and work.
Great questions.
That's great. And I realize we only have 1 minute left. So as a reminder, our emails, I'm going to put them back up. And yeah, please feel free to email us. We love this work. We have been thinking about this report for the last year plus. So please feel free to email us with any questions. Thank you so much for your engagement and being interested in these.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.